Sometimes in business, we really need to believe that anything is possible. In 2004, 2 years after I started a business called Enterprise Architects in Melbourne, Australia, it was a small business at that time. I got a call through from the virtual front desk in my serviced office in South Melbourne. And the person on the other end of the line was talking to me about underwater power generation. And I immediately thought, this guy clearly has no idea what enterprise architecture is or what I do, and I should probably jump off the call politely. But an innate curiosity in me kept me on the call, and it turned out he was talking about a new technology in power generation. And next thing I know, I'm sitting in a car on a street outside his block of flats, and I've got one of my team next to me, Dimitri. And Dimitri was a nuclear physicist from Russia, but he was working with us as an enterprise architect in Australia for a directories company. And we're talking about going up and checking out this prototype of this technology that this man had been talking about that day. And we agreed that this could vary anywhere from something that was totally insane to something that was entirely valid. And it could end up like a scene out of Pulp Fiction or a scene that was quite interesting and inspiring. So we're walking up the steps, up the apartment building up to level 3, and knock on the door, and the door opens, and a man emerges from the darkness in the flat, and I couldn't really tell if he was 45 or 65 because he had very dark sunken eyes, and he actually looked like he'd been electrocuted quite a few times. And for me, given the subject matter of what we were checking out, it sort of lent to the credibility, actually. I sort of thought maybe, my first instinct was maybe there's something in this conversation. And so he led me into his lounge room. And
sorry to interrupt. There was some sort of a signal or something there, wasn't there?
Oh, there was yeah. Thanks,
You're
welcome. Knowing that the meeting itself was it could go anywhere. Dimitri and I had worked out a signal, which was a bit of a rub of the earlobe. At which time, if any of us provided that signal, we would politely wrap up the conversation and move on.
I still look for that signal, by the way.
Yeah.
Every now and then he pulls his ear, and I'm like, okay, do we need to end the conversation now?
So I find myself in his lounge room, and we sit down, and on the coffee table there's a machine. It's the prototype, and surrounding us there are all sorts of electrical gadgets and equipment. It was a workshop come TV room inside his flat, and he proceeds to tell me a story, the backstory of how this whole thing came together. And he said that the fundamentals of electrical engineering have been taught in essentially the same way in universities since the 50s. And that's now accepted as a given and this was in 2004, but that's now accepted as a given in the academic and scientific community. But he'd gone back to the first principles and looked at some of the fundamental principles of the production of alternating current alternators and power generation. And he had rethought how this system worked. And he then went on to explain all of the elements of that with quite convincing diagrams and discussion. But I was a layman, so I didn't fully understand what he was talking about in that meeting. But my intuition, my best judgment was that it seemed to be plausible. And what I thought was going to be an hour-long meeting became a 3-hour-long meeting, and we drank a 6-pack of Pilsner together, and then we've said our goodbyes, and Dimitri and I walk into the car, and as we get to the car, I turn to Dimitri and I say, "So what do you think, man?" And he looks at me and he says, "Hugh, just not sure. I'll just have to have a bit of a think about it. Leave it with me." And at 5 o'clock the next morning, he calls me on my mobile phone and wakes me up, and he says, "Hugh, I've been up all night. I've been thinking about this deeply, and I think that there might be a profound innovation here. And I think we should look at it more closely. So this then led to an 18-month project that we coined the Pilsner Project, because we drank a six-pack of Pilsner pretty much every time we caught up as a team. And a bunch of other people actually came on board. And we went through the process of looking at commercialising this technology, all the while running Enterprise Architects as a consultancy. And for those of you who have had an experience of commercialising innovative technology, you would appreciate that the commercialisation process is more than just having a good idea or something that works. There are a whole bunch of things that need to come together to actually to bring that into existence. So the sad story is that this billion-dollar idea that I was looking at in this flat that afternoon didn't actually come to fruition in that way. However, a number of the core principles in the technology now exist in electrical cars and a variety of other appliances for this type of technology. But what's important about this story for me is that it reflects a core sense of belief that anything is possible. It's something that I hold personally, and it's something that exists within our organisation as a way of thinking. And one thing that I've noticed, even with the presentation prior to this one, this idea that we can change these massive organisations, the idea that there is possibility, we can engage people, we can be part of an authentic organisation, we can deliver meaning and purpose inside these businesses, is something that's deeply held in me and also in my organisation. And it's also something that I found when I discovered Huddle, which is an organisation that Melissa runs. And so the story with us is that Enterprise Architects eventually grew to be quite a successful business. We became the market leader for enterprise architecture consultancy in Australia. We launched our business overseas in Europe, Asia, and the United States. And however, with the architecture story, I knew that there was something that was missing, and we were doing amazing strategic planning, amazing consensus building type work, but there was a connection we were missing. And when Melissa and I met through a common contact, and we had a meeting of minds that was fundamentally founded on this idea of belief in what's possible. And it was really easy to work with her and to resonate with her right from the outset. And then when we discovered our respective worlds of knowledge and understanding, the architecture perspective and strategic planning perspective in the organisation, and the human-centred design perspective that Huddle espouses, I saw this connection of these two sort of forests of knowledge and an opportunity to synergise that knowledge and actually make it happen. So that amazing meeting then turned into a bunch of experiments, and the experiments turned into an opportunity with a global client. And the opportunity with a global client we decided to partner on as two businesses. I had the international business, and Melissa was importing the team from Australia from Huddle. And then the partnership became a joint venture. And then we have the new invention FromHereOn. And we're well into the second phase of that project with the client at the moment. And this is a work in progress for us. So we haven't solved all the problems, and we haven't revealed all the insights. But what we're doing is we're a working case study of what happens when you take an organisational architectural mindset and a human-centred mindset, and you bring these communities together. So what this presentation is all about is about understanding what it takes to move from a product-focused organisation to a design-led and customer-centric organisation, which was the case for the Enterprise Architects International organisation that we have now subsumed into FromHereOn as part of the joint venture. And we're also looking at a case study of applying that thinking with a particular client. Mm. So at this point, I'd like to introduce Melissa. Melissa is a PhD in user-centred design, and also an awesome partner to work with.
Thank you. There's sort of two things that are going to happen at once, and I much prefer, from a user-centred perspective, to be witnessing a presentation that's a bit sort of conversational and not too rigid in in the delivery. So there'll probably be a bit of banter on the stage, but also if you want to ask us questions while we're talking, I would invite that. That's all good too. I'm not sure if that's allowed in the rules, but I'm a rule breaker, so sorry. So what we're going to do is talk a little bit about some insights that we've got from working with the client that are actually exactly transferable to some of the learnings that we've got within establishing From Here On, and bringing together these two very different worlds of practice and discipline, being enterprise architecture and human-centered design. The reason why I'm referring to it as human-centered design, this is again another probably idiosyncrasy, is when Huddle talks about what we do, we believe that the client gives us the context within which we practice human-centered design. So if we're solving a service-related problem, we're engaging in service design. If we're solving a strategic problem, we're engaging in strategic design. And it's all coming from a place of human-centered design methodologies. And when we are partnering with people within the organisation that come from a technology perspective or a business perspective, then we're starting to pull together all the multidisciplinary disciplines, which we've spoken about a lot, and then you start getting the Venn diagrams, and there we have it, we're doing design thinking. So the bit of background for the case study that I want to talk about is it's a large financial services firm, one of the biggest, and the CEO has made a really bold statement and said that they are committing to be the world's best in customer experiences. And you've probably heard this over and over again. CEOs talk about this all the time. The thing that was really that shocked the executive leadership team for this particular organisation was that there was no mention that aspiration was within the bounds of their current industry. So I had the opportunity, and have had many opportunities now, to actually challenge him on this, because one of the things that we ask is, are you serious? Are you actually serious? Because people talk about becoming aligned with the customer all the time, but they don't necessarily know what it feels like to be aligned with the customer. They don't yet have the felt experience of leading in an organisation that is customer-centric. So I was asking, are you serious about this? Because it means whole-scale change. And he sat back in his seat and he put his arms behind his head and he went, yes. So we're 2 years in and it's a long and bumpy road, but instead of talking about our processes and the methods and stuff, what I wanted to do was just focus on the learnings that are emerging.
Now, can I just make the point here that when Melissa and I prepared for this presentation, we not only did we have an interesting discussion around what goes in and what goes out from an architectural and design perspective, but I did actually really like this framework because it's a framework. And but a lot of the learnings we're going to talk through here also correlate to our experience as a consultancy. So. Enterprise Architects was a product-centric firm. We focused on architectural products, producing insights through these products. And what we're doing now is we're understanding that the human-centered perspective plays a key role in how you operate that process. So that's something we're going to look at.
So I'm just providing you with this really simple framework that we use at Huddle. We just refer to it as the sets now, competency sets. Because it just gives you a bit of a navigation around how we think about all of the elements that need to change within an organisation when you're shifting it to become truly customer-centric. And a lot of the time what we find is when we're engaged in a client business and they're looking to embed design capability, whether it's human-centered design or design-led innovation or any variations of those, the focus is on the tangible aspects of that. So it's usually around the skill sets or the tool sets. How do we run the workshops and what are the tools that we use to be able to run those workshops? And there's lots of courses and stuff available where that is taught. One of the things that we focus on a lot with this particular client, this is where we've started in particular, is in the thinking capability set. So we refer to these as the mindsets and the knowledge sets. And the mindset is really fundamental. If you're going to have whole-scale change and you're shifting an organisation's trajectory from understanding itself from an organisational-centric perspective to understanding itself from a customer-centred perspective, that requires a mindset shift from a leadership perspective, as well as everyone else in the organisation. So a mindset is really your worldview. It's the filter through which you make sense of anything around you. And it's also the thing that sets up the stance that you have in being able to address a problem or not. Now, there are two really big mindset groups that we talk about a lot in our work. One is a generative mindset and one is a receiving mindset. Now, the receiving word sounds a little bit kind of passive, but it's not at all. In a generative mindset, you believe that you have agency in creating the future that you desire for yourself, and that anything is up for question and all assumptions are ready to be challenged, and that is your reality. And lots of designers occupy this space. It's just their natural instinct to be questioning and poking and prodding and iterating and changing. And then there's the receiving mindset, which is the belief that you are equipped to be able to respond in the most strategic and appropriate way to the inputs that are coming in at you. So organisations exist in a receiving mindset, which is market dynamics are changing, we need to respond. That's a receiving mindset. A generative mindset in the context of an organisation might be a CEO who says, we're going to be doing this by this time, in this way, I believe that we can do it, and he aligns every single thing in his organisation to do that because he believes that he can create the future that he desires for the organisation, despite what's happening in the market. And that's a fundamentally different mindset, and it's not very common. So that gives you an example of when we're talking about shifting mindsets, what it is that we're actually talking about. It's the fundamental worldviews. Knowledge sets are essentially the combination of knowledge that you gain through going to school and doing extra courses and reading books and failing. Have I put failing on there? Good. And failure, so that you get lots of knowledge. The next two are the doing capability sets. So these are the skill sets and the tool sets. Skill sets I've already explained. An example might be how to facilitate a design session, how to run a design critique, how to do a performance review skills. And the tool sets are the things that you actually use to be able to bring the combination of all of those things into the world. So when we're thinking about the change that we need to enable for our client, we're thinking about it in the context of all of these things. And we're also thinking about all of these things in the context of the journey that we're on with From Here On.
Yeah, and just on that, the interesting thing that we've found is that the connection point between the architectural mindset and the design mindset is about, across the competency sets, it exists at the skill set. So the facilitation, the insight hunting, these sorts of things are common to the two groups, but the techniques that are applied are often quite different. And one of the interesting points that I've heard over the last few days is this debate between outside in or inside out thinking, and some people are talking about doing both. They kind of talk about it as though it's sort of a linear, or it's on the same axis, whereas we think of these things as you can understand the organisation sort of inside out, but the design mindset can infuse all the way along it and apply an outside-in perspective. So actually doing both, not or, is what we've discovered, and recognising that a lot of the skill sets that are applied in a standard architectural process can be evolved, and in a design process can be informed by that architectural perspective.
So one of the biggest learnings so far is working against and with current cultural norms. One of the things that we tend to do as designers when we walk into an organisation is we can, through our, all of the things that I've just got, the sets that are available to us, we can identify areas really quickly that are quite meaningful that can be addressed in some way. So it's almost like when we show up, something's going to change. We're going to shift something. We're going to suggest a process change over there, or we're going to suggest a different way of working over here. And one of the things that we've learned is that there are certain cultural norms that you just got to go with. That it's not actually worth trying to redefine and redesign. There was a bit of a meme that happened yesterday, actually. I think it was from Joseph's presentation, where he talked about jump on something that's already moving. That program of work that's already in train, just jump on that and go with that to get momentum. Similar sort of sentiment. This organisation that we're working with has as a culture that is relentless in its execution. Just, you could give it any number, any metric, and it will just go bang, 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 and hit it. And that is really strong in them. So from a human-centred design perspective, and I have a look at the metrics, and I kind of sit there and go, are these even the right metrics that we should be hitting? Like, are these meaningful? But instead of trying to say relentless execution right now is not serving our cause to becoming the world's best, let's do something different. What we're actually doing is relentless execution is something that you guys are awesome at. Let's make sure that you're executing on the right thing. And I know that sounds like a really obvious statement, but it took us a while. We were working against it for a while. We were trying to slow it down because we thought that we were heading in the wrong direction. But it's an example of having that perspective to say, what is it that already exists in this organisation that is a cultural norm that has been around for years and years and years that we should actually be leveraging, as opposed to trying to change it in some way. And this has come up a lot, the speaking of different languages. In an organisational context, we've been asked to come in and help them make sense of what it takes to be able to transform, to become a human-centred, design-led organisation. So we speak the language of design, and as people who talk about empathy and being human-centred and all of this, we don't even know that we have this language that is foreign to them, because we feel like we're actually being quite clear. And one of the things that we find that we have to do is be really explicit about that. So when I say, and this is what some of the sentences sound like, when I use the term design research, what I'm referring to is a body of methodologies that use design as a way to uncover insights in the population that you're interested in. I don't mean the research of design, which is often a thing that we come across, because we say design research in a sentence and we keep going, and the person that we're talking to is going, why are we researching design? I thought we were going to be talking to customers. And ethnographic research doesn't equal stakeholder interviews. You know, these sorts of things.
So just on that, this is a key point of the firepower of the architectural piece. The nature of architecture is about language. It's about understanding different communities, technical communities, business communities, functional communities, and being able to build consensus for a particular way forward by levelling the discussion at the right level of detail, in the right part of the organisation, in the right language that's pertinent to the problem that you're trying to solve. And so the enterprise architect's business over 13 years or so has really iterated and evolved that capability to understand how to speak the language of the business in a way that is native to the business. So what that provides in this collaboration is an adapter or a connection point into the organisation. The sort of work that we would traditionally do is often conceptual design of business architecture to get agreement on a particular way forward for people, process, technology or information, or a combination of those things as part of business capabilities. And we would do that across operating units for multinational businesses. So we would have leadership teams coming together, and they would need to understand what is the global context, what is the global strategy, what is the intent of the organisation strategically, and then how does that manifest into the operating units of the organisation? And how do we do this in such a way that we can design globally but act locally across the group? So that provides an adapter and a connector for this mindset to be infused into the organisation in a native tongue to the organisation, which is really powerful.
The other thing that happens when we are trying to foster an environment for customer centricity is that we can't help but perform our roles. How many times have you heard that sentence? To perform a role within an organisation. And one of the things that is so fundamental to cultivating a culture of human centricity is to be authentic. And sometimes your role doesn't necessarily allow you to be the most authentic representation of yourself. So one of the techniques, I guess you could call it, that we're doing with this particular client is we're trying to have people understand that when they're acting a particular way, that is them performing their role, versus when they're actually engaged in dialogue with someone, which is the person-to-person connection. And we heard that in the previous presentation where it was about really meaningful conversations. And the thing that we found was the biggest blocker to that was people didn't realise that they had an option to actually be a person as opposed to their role. Oh, this is my job. This is what I'm here to do. What do you mean, don't be my role? What does that mean? Anarchy. We're not talking about don't do your job. We're saying be a person. And one of the things that, and perhaps you can talk to this bit with from here on, is when people start being people, the dialogue enables a whole bunch of different opportunities to synergise as opposed to the more limited opportunities when someone is being a designer and someone is being an architect.
Yeah, and I think the architects, because we think structurally, we tend to settle into a role description or a description of capability from a people perspective quite readily. This was an area, I think, in the collaboration where we've really managed to elevate the mindset and the thinking of the architecture group. It's very interesting to see what happens when you introduce that uncertainty into the architectural community, because I think it'd be fair to say that the design community are practitioners of uncertainty, of using uncertainty to discover, and architects are often in the practice of removing or reducing uncertainty. So codifying and making specific how things need to operate. And this play between the two is a really interesting thing that we're seeing that we'll go through in a few minutes.
Yeah. And I think the takeout, you've probably noticed that there's takeouts in the bottom corner. This one is worth talking about because it's not something that you can do. You can't go up to someone and say, okay, I would like you to stop being your role and I just want you to be a person. It's kind of a bit insulting. It's like, I'm still a person while I'm being, what are you talking about? It's actually about curating the environment, and I'm talking environment in all of its senses, so the physical, the energetic, the tools, the layout, the whole thing, to curate the environment that actually enables that natural, innate nature of people to want to connect authentically to emerge. And it's a design of conditions thing as opposed to a direct, explicit command thing. This is another one. This one is particularly, it's a sticking point for me. What I'd love you all to do, actually, is when you go back to your jobs, do a bit of a social experiment so that every time you sit in meetings, obviously you need to concentrate on what's actually being said, the content, but what I'd like you to do is mine the conversation for whether or not we're actually talking about activities or if we're talking about outcomes. Because what we found is that when we talk about activities, this person's going to do this by this point and they're going to be interacting with that person and we're going to get this research project in and we're going to results and There are so many different combinations and manifestations of how something can be done that you have many opportunities for divergent thinking. And I don't mean that in a creative sense. I mean that in that there's multiple pathways of getting a job done. But we often forget what it is that we're actually trying to do in the first place. And when you can have an outcome-focused conversation, usually the people around the room, and especially when you're engaging in a multidisciplinary team, that's where the conversation converges. So if we can have more outcome-focused conversations as opposed to activity-focused conversations, getting alignment is much quicker. Though the organisational tradition at the moment is to have an activity-based conversation. We're always talking about the things that we're doing and when we're going to do them by.
So the movement of business architecture at the moment is applying something called a motivation model, which is a way to describe and trace in strategic intent into initiatives across the organisation, into the investment program, as Chris Potts describes it. The motivation model architecturally is a very robust strategic reference for all manner of discussion about strategic suitability of a particular scenario or way forward. If you then combine it with an understanding of core motivation that exists from a human perspective, you end up with an extremely powerful reference for the organisation to act from. And that's something that we've been really focusing on in our engineering to pull it and design to pull these things together.
Yeah, and one of the conversations that I just had recently, because I'm on a really steep learning curve as well, because enterprise architecture for me is something that it's not a part of my knowledge set. So I'm building knowledge so that I can become, multilingual. And working with two experienced architects, they were taking me through the structure of a motivational model and how it gets pulled together. And what I find myself is asking the questions of, how do you know that they're the things how do you know that those drivers are the right drivers to be basing everything on? And when you tell me that you do this and you do this and then you do this, my question is, so that what happens? And the scenario was we need to reconfigure this work because the client has asked us to do that. And my question was, well, what is the problem that we're trying to help them solve? Like, what's the question that the client is asking us so that we can do that? And just the synergy of that, whereas designers don't necessarily go to the detail of being able to visualize and map out the complexities of the infrastructure and the systems and the processes and all of that. We have that power when we can bring the two together. I just saw, was that a subtle hint? You just looked at your watch.
Yeah, I did.
Okay, so this is another really important one, and I'd love to engage in conversation with anyone who has cracked it. And this is the rubber band effect. So this is usually not necessarily designers, perhaps it's just an external thing. As externals going into an organisation, we have a perspective of the organisation that is obviously unique, and we can work in ways that create the environment and ways of working that enable people to experiment with different ways of thinking and different ways of problem solving and collaboration. And then when we go, that was great, awesome, hopefully we've done a good job building the capability, and we leave. If anything were to ping that system from whether it's a natural disaster or the, stock market's crashed or something's happened, everything rubber bands back to the old norms of how to work, and everyone goes back and does things that they know how to do. And this for us is particularly frustrating because we can't necessarily be on site all the time with every single client, making sure that those things are in place, which is another benefit.
Yeah, I think in fact, the Toyota presentation sort of demonstrated that.
Yeah.
You can't just give it one push and expect that that's going to set the ship in train and they'll achieve what they're setting out to achieve. There needs to be a constant focus and a real strategy around how do you keep this thing alive and how do you make it real at a core level. So for us, we really believe that this is about purpose. So if we can tap into the core purpose of what it is that the organisation is actually setting out to achieve, such that their team can deeply buy into it because they understand the outcome that's going to be delivered from a customer standpoint. But then from an architectural standpoint, strategically, they can understand how it traces. This diagram is a one for the architects. It describes essentially a decomposition of various elements of an architectural process. So on the left-hand side, you have a motivation model, which would look at environmental context and try and capture the motivation of the organisation strategically. And I should say that this is a description pre sort of Huddle and FHO of how we would look at things architecturally. And then we look at business models. So we might be looking at business model innovation. We might be looking at different opportunities to draw from the platform in the organisation, as well as imagine new opportunities about what could this organisation do with a new business model. And then the decomposition of that into the go-to-market, the service model, and the operating model. And then in the operating model into your people, process, tools and information. And this process culminates in, for us, for the architecture, enterprise architects in the group, it would typically have culminated in a what we call a war room environment, where we have a storyboard with all of these documents and a story being told about what happens, how is the organisation currently tracking to the strategy, and where is the misalignment with their projected target state based on the analysis that we do. And then we help to realign them to something that they actually want to achieve. And then we build consensus within the organisation as a consequence. Now, here's the next architectural document, which, talking about rubber banding, this is the architect's impression of a human-centred design perspective, okay?
Still makes me laugh, I love
it.
Yeah,
so just add that bit in and we're sweet, right? But what it does do is it does recognise that this concept of experience, and if you notice the deep design, the purpose and stance infusion into the motivation model, we're starting to understand how we get a human perspective to come in, to be an important reference to capture the minds and the hearts of the people inside the organisation who are going to do something about it. So what's going on right now is we're working on phase 2 of a project with a global financial services client. They're very large. They operate in more than 50 countries, and
different to the one that we've been
different to the one we've been talking about.
Yep.
And I can't be too specific, but
Yep.
These guys are creating the organisation of the future, and it's an extremely exciting program of work. It's truly transformational across the business, and at its core, it's putting people at the centre of that transformation. And this particular piece is a particular service portfolio that's going to enable that inside the organisation. And what this is a description of the streams of activity that we're applying in the second phase to give you a feel for how we're starting to knit together these elements of design and architectural mindset. The architecture bringing the scale and the organisational language, and the design bringing meaning and relevance and asking the right question at each step of the journey. So you can see the communications thread, communicating what's going to happen, what is happening, what just happened, keeping people connected with the core journey. And then you have the insight hunting and the service, the customer experience perspective, and looking at where is the innovation here, what is possible. Let's not constrain ourselves necessarily on what currently exists in the organisation, or just move to a reference model somewhere. Let's imagine how we might do this, and let's look for great examples within the organisation that we can use as a reference or a pattern that could possibly be expanded, across the business.
Yeah, so this is essentially an internal service design, strategic service design challenge, which also obviously incorporates the external customers of the organisation as well. The thing that's really beautiful that I love seeing is one of the techniques that we've employed to be able to get some insight from within the organisation is called a cultural probe, which always makes people chuckle, which is essentially the way that we've done it is like setting up a daily activity. It's almost like journaling, diarising and taking photos and that kind of thing. And we use it to be able to gain insights in people's context. But what's happening is that this information was never available to the architects prior to this collaboration. And they're so excited about it, because it's like, oh my God, this actually makes my decision making around what's important and what's not easier, because I'm getting a sense of meaning and a sense of purpose and a sense of direction from this work.
And they're getting amazing stories, right?
Yeah.
So that the questions are things like, what's on your mind? What's on your mind at the moment? Or tell me your story, your life story. And people actually sit down and they write a story and they connect and they're engaging in this process. And the architects are now connecting with these stories and the understanding. It's a really, really interesting experience.
So when are you going to do the audio thing?
Oh, yeah. No, just give me a second. So interesting point about this here is that there has been a little bit of what we say in Australia is a little bit of argy-bargy between the architects and the designers about how you might sequence things or what you run concurrently, what informs what technique you use to do something, and I think we're still probably working some of that out.
Yeah.
And by the way, the client is absolutely aware of the fact that we're working this out as we go, which is awesome because it gives us an opportunity to work with them in a very creative process and in a collaborative process where they're giving us feedback and we're developing and we're going on a journey together. So it's quite a unique circumstance, I think. But anyway, the capability, the way that you'll notice some difference in the language for architects, this idea of capability prototyping, and the way that the divergent part of the process and then the convergent part of the process and how that then all culminates with the design and the architecture perspective into an organisational outcome. That's what's happening here. Now, I just want to cue a little bit of audio. This is just one second. This is a debrief after the first phase of within our team of this particular project, and I just wanted to capture a little bit of the humanity, if you like, of what's actually going on for us in this experience. So, hit it.
That was one of the best handover meetings I've ever had, personally, where there was silence in the room. From everyone, and Andrew was standing back with the biggest smile on his face, watching his team, and then in that silence, Behrend piped out how much he loved it, and that came from him, and that was just the most satisfying thing, and it was really truly a pleasure for me to be working with you guys. So thank you personally. Yeah, and I look forward to the next phase.
You hadn't heard that, had you? No. So that just sort of captures there's some connections, there's some synapses firing here, and the sort of energy that's in our team. This is an energy that's propagating and developing, and it's an energy that I saw when we first met and when the businesses first came together, and it's something that's growing, and it's also growing inside the client. So. And this is what fires us up as an organisation, and this is what we're passionate about, because at the end of the day, this is about meaning and about how we connect other organisations and enable them to connect with their own purpose and their own meaning. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I guess we can just take time for a few questions, and there's already one.
Thank you, Michael Poulin. In your presentation, a couple times you said architectures, designers, architectural community, designer community. So I have two questions. One is what the difference between them to you, and the second, where those communities are sitting inside the enterprise structure.
As in our enterprise structure or the client side?
Clients, of course.
Yeah, okay. I think we talk about these two communities. We've already discussed the fact that our trajectory is to a single practice where we don't differentiate between these communities. But we're also quite honest in the fact that this is a learning process. And we have people who are at different stages of development, different stages of buy-in, different stages of understanding as to what is the potential for this. And right at the coalface, we've got this team doing it and experiencing it, and to some extent that's propagating within the team, but the team's still wanting to understand what that's all about. They don't fully understand what it's all about necessarily. So we've actually got 2 days of an intense workshop with the whole team coming together next week to go through the next iteration of learnings of this experience to sort of franchise that out. And I think in the Intuit presentation, when Joseph was talking about the small community, I think it was 6 or 9 people with the design approach. Well, we've got not just a design approach, but we've got a combined approach of things. We're doing a similar thing. So we're trying to get a core and then build that out within the group. Inside the client side, it's absolutely imperceptible. So the two work side by side. The process is integrated. The client experience is fully integrated.
Yeah, so I'll give you a specific example of what the differences are in the background. So the designers that we have within the Huddle community and also in FHO typically come from very different, actually varied backgrounds. So some from industrial design, some from graphic design, some from communication design, some that are, like me, biomedical engineers that have then retrained as a human-centered designer through postgraduate studies and made their way through to human centricity. So there's that community of designers. And then the architects, perhaps you could talk about the specific background of the architects that we have.
Yeah, so the architects, in many cases, come from a technology background. That's the heritage. And if you go to sort of first principles in architecture, you know, the ones and zeros, the fact that we needed to create interoperability in large organisations between systems and things, has developed this deep-seated logical mindset, analytical mindset that's grown up. But what's happened is there was I think the moment in time in 2009, at least for our community, where we transcended the IT story, and the logical perspective found its way into business context in a number of different environments. And that logical perspective is a really valid, important perspective to understand where to find insights about what's possible, what can we leverage, and how do we make something happen. These days, we're actually starting to see architects emerge from non-technical backgrounds and come in again from cross-disciplinary perspectives. So who knows what's going to happen? And we're open-minded. We're open-minded.
If I may add to that, I think in our experience, the most interesting people in these processes often have a background like you, like the ones that come from somewhere else and then had to change several times.
Yeah. I studied as an architect, by the way, and
physical space,
and a computer games designer. Yeah. Okay.
More questions?
Have you guys applied that whole cycle in an accelerated fashion to a corporate strategic planning cycle?
Yes. I can talk to Bupa. Yeah. It was really painful, actually. It was really painful. So we were asked to help this is a separate organisation, to essentially work out what the next version of themselves was. And of course that starts off with some sort of strategy and strategic planning. And what they wanted to do was come up with a hybrid way of working, which was fundamentally design-driven and human-centred in its nature, but used agile as a rapid, iterative way of working, and then through into the execution using lean as a way to make sure that, you know, the quality and all that execution was spot on. So at the beginning of that process, it was a dream brief. You know, this is a massive organisation, it's international, and it's got the foresight to actually go, right, we're investing in you guys working out the next version of us while we're succeeding. It was just like, yeah. And we got all of the, you know, leading minds in the room, and we worked out this prototype way of working and running a strategic planning process. And then we prototyped it and we proved it and we said, look, in 6 weeks we went from here to here, and we actually we wrote a mock Harvard Business Review 2020, this is what success looks like sort of thing. And in there we had, this is your strategy, this is the business model, this is the way of working, these are the methodologies, this is your strategic resource planning process, and it was just this comprehensive thing. And then what happened was that the organisation was still the organisation. And they still had their governance processes, and they still had their boards to report to, and they still had their... So what was happening was that we were building momentum in this really iterative way of working and getting slammed at the top when we needed to report out. And we needed to get responses quickly. So we needed them to start changing the way that they made decisions. And it almost went to this process of not making decisions, but actually making judgment calls. And we talk about this a lot. Yeah. Where it's just, this is my judgment call on this. I actually don't have time to gather all the information and data that's going to have me make a data-driven decision on this one. I'm going to need to make a call. Good. So that was, that challenge still exists today. Yeah.
One last one? No.
Can I just make a point in closing? Sorry.
Sorry,
I'm really excited about this particular conference because we have a really interesting mix of people in this community, and it's a really early stage of something that is bound to happen. We're seeing markers for this everywhere, that this is where the market is going, where the opportunity is. And I think we're a very open organisation. We're very interested in collaboration. We would invite contact from anyone who wants to talk and collaborate about this sort of thing. And I really appreciate everybody taking the time out. So thanks very much.
Thank you.